Everybody for joining us today. Most of you know me, but I'm Dan Wiener, president of CIBS. And this morning we start a series of what we hope to be a long series of EDAC interviews. And we're inviting forward-thinking and influential leaders on Long Island. And today we're really excited to welcome one of those guests. And Mike is going to introduce you in a minute. But before I turn it over, I just want to tell you that if you have a question, feel free to ask during the time we're together, but we're going to reserve the answers until the end. So you can do that a couple of different ways. You can do it through the chat, or you can raise your hand and Christine will release your voice so that you can speak. And that's about it. Mike, you want to take over? And
Sure. So everybody, welcome to the Economic Development Advocacy Committee's first webinar. We're pretty excited about this. It's a start of many more to come. We do have a few other speakers planned. Today, our guest is Peter Cavallaro, Mayor of the Village of Westbury. CIBS, as an organization, has recognized the need to support smart growth development, regionally significant infrastructure projects, and the importance of monitoring state and local legislation that impacts Long Island's long-term economic growth and addresses our quality of life interests. Through the Economic Development Advocacy Committee, which consists of Dan Wiener, Ted Strategos, Eric Launer, and David Panetta, and myself, CIBS has supported a number of smart growth, mixed-use, transit-oriented developments, and have recently recognized proposed legislation allowing for self-certification of building permits and construction documents as worthy of our support. And I'm sure many of you have seen our emails sending out our form letter to send to your state senator, which I think is very important. It really impacts all of us. And I think it could be real positive, as you all know how long it takes to get space built out. Among the projects that we have supported in the past are the Nassau Hub Land Lease Amendment with Nassau County, which was attended by John Magnani. The Miller Ridge Inn Hotel project in the town of Oyster Bay, which Eric Launer spoke in favor of. The Orchard District Transit-Oriented Overlay in Glen Cove, which I attended and spoke in favor of. We have the Seritage Growth Heritage Village in the town of Oyster Bay, where one of our members, Doug Fuhrer, was present. We also were at the Long Beach Superblock development with Engel Berman, which was Paul Fetcher. And another was the 65 Daly Road, the 55 and over community, the upzoning where Dan Wiener spoke in favor of that as well. So today's program is going to focus on the planning initiatives that the Village of Westbury has implemented to support economic activity. Some of these initiatives include smart growth, mixed use, and transit-oriented development, which required a master plan and rezoning effort, and also an implementation of a New York State DRI grant. And I'm going to take this opportunity now to cover the mayor's bio, and then the mayor can take over. Peter Cavallaro is a lifelong resident of the Village of Westbury, and in 2009 was elected as the 11th mayor in the village's history. Prior to that, he had served 10 years on the Village Board of Trustees and 12 years as a member of its planning board. Under Mayor Cavallaro's tenure, Westbury has been recognized by both the Long Island Business News and Vision Long Island for its smart growth initiatives, including the development of over 800 multifamily residential units in its downtown and the multi-million-dollar renovation of its old downtown movie theater into the space at Westbury, a unique downtown performing arts center, which is actually beautiful inside if anybody's had a chance to attend any events. Mayor Cavallaro and the village have been recognized by Hofstra University's School of Suburban Diversity for their commitment to a diverse community. Twice during Mayor Cavallaro's term, CNNmoney.com has recognized the village as one of the top 20 places in the nation for young professionals to live, and the online publication NerdWallet.com ranked Westbury among the top 50 places in New York State for entrepreneurs to start a business, and among the top 100 places in New York State for young families to live, in separate rankings. In 2016, Westbury was awarded one of the state's $10 million DRI grants, the only community at the time on Long Island to receive such a grant. To further the village's downtown revitalization efforts, that grant has funded 7 important projects, most of which have been completed or are substantially complete. This includes the historic adoption of the village's transit-oriented development zoning code for the area around its Long Island Railroad station. Mayor Cavallaro is recognized for his bipartisan approach to government, working with all stakeholders from all political parties to accomplish important governmental goals for the benefit of the community. Professionally, Mayor Cavallaro is a practicing attorney specializing in corporate, real estate, insurance, not-for-profit, and municipal law, and he has participated in and served in numerous other past and present professional, community, and charitable endeavors. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mayor. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I always take every opportunity I can to talk about Westbury. I love the community. I grew up there, and I thank you for inviting me to talk to you a little bit about the community and what we've been doing there. I'm happy to see a couple of people that I've had the pleasure of either working with or working on transactions or other things with. I see David Panetta has joined us, Peter Curry, and some others that I have the pleasure of knowing. So thanks for joining us this morning, as well as David Chauvin, who I've known for some time. So, you know, my background maybe is a little bit different than some other municipal officials. I was trained as a corporate lawyer, and I still serve sort of as a corporate lawyer. As the mayor of Westbury, it's a part-time position. So, you know, I do have a job as a lawyer, doing mostly real estate development work, not necessarily in New York, really out of state. I work as an in-house counsel for a company that does those types of things. But in addition to being a lawyer, because I work in-house, you know, I have business background and a business experience. And I think that brings kind of a unique perspective to what I've done, you know, as mayor. Because, you know, in business and when you're trying to do things economically for your company, you know, obviously you have to be results oriented and not just stand on, you know, principle or ceremony, and you have to try to get things done. And so that's what I've tried to do as mayor, bring my experience as a lawyer and as a business person, you know, to the fore. Westbury is, many of you probably have some familiarity, but Westbury is probably one of the most diverse communities on Long Island. It's centrally located in Nassau County, and our population is almost evenly split demographically between various major ethnic groups. I always like to show one reflection of the diversity. I happen to be a parishioner at St. Bridget's Church, and our church on the weekends has 4 or 5 masses in English. It has 3 masses in Spanish. It has a mass in Creole, and it has 2 masses in Italian. So it kind of just is a reflection of, you know, the diversity of the community, and that diversity brings a richness to the community. I think that's important. Also brings maybe a different perspective in terms of some of the things that we try to accomplish. I was preceded. I've been mayor for 12 years. I was just reelected for my 4th term, so I've completed 12 years as mayor, but I have 34 years of experience in Westbury in Westbury Village government. Before me, there was a mayor who served for 28 years, and he really started the ball rolling in Westbury with transit-oriented development or smart growth before those terms were really ever used. As I think was noted, you know, we've developed on our downtown over the past, you know, decade and a half, you know, between 700 and 800 units of multifamily residential living. Most of those originally were condominiums, but more recently, you know, some rentals. And so, you know, we kind of saw the need to kind of diversify the housing stock in our community early and to take steps to kind of do that. We were presented, you know, with a very unique opportunity when we were awarded the Downtown Revitalization Grant 5 years ago now. It was July 5 years ago, so just short of 5 years. I always say, you know, in municipal government, you have more ideas than you have resources to implement them. But the DRI grant, you know, provided us with $10 million worth of resources that we would not have had that allowed us to kind of pursue some of the things that we wanted to do. And as was mentioned earlier, we funded 7 projects, as some of them are completed, and some of them, if you drive down Post Avenue today, you'll see a major streetscape project that's currently being done. You'll also see the recreation center and a community center that's being renovated. And tomorrow we're having a ribbon cutting with the state on our Arts Council building, which we purchased and renovated as one of the 7 projects. But, you know, I said from the beginning, of the 7 projects, they're all kind of equally important, but there was one that I said was more equally important than the equally important projects. And that was really our rezoning, our transit-oriented rezoning project. We felt that we had 50 some odd acres adjacent to our train station, which was light industrial zoned, and really the only part of the community that was, I would say, in need of redevelopment on a major way. And so we were able to undertake a project. It took about a year, once it was approved by the state, to do a complete comprehensive review of those 52 acres, do the environmental impact statements that needed to be done. And we implemented our TOD zone, our transit-oriented development zone, just about a year and a half ago on that property. And that's going to enable us, we believe, to really take our redevelopment efforts to the next level and really propel our community into the future in the way that we want it to be: sustainable and diversified and housing stock for every price point. Our community has houses that are selling now over $1 million, and they also have houses that are much more modest, probably selling in the, you know, $350,000 to $400,000 range. We have rental apartments. We have a lot of condominiums. Our goal with the transit-oriented development was to create projects, again, that replicated that type of housing stock in those developments, just like we have in the rest of the community. So we have a lot going on. We have a great board. I work with a great board who's assisted in all of these things. We've gotten a lot of great advice from the teams that we put together to help us to do that. But we're looking to the future really optimistically. COVID, you know, kind of slowed us down a little bit, but a lot of these projects proceeded during the COVID period and are now coming to fruition. And I think for our community, you know, we see that what we've done in the past couple of years is going to allow us to come out of, you know, this last year and a half or so, you know, maybe much better than we have the right to, and much better maybe than some other communities will be able to. So that's kind of like an overview, I think, of what we've done and where we're coming from. And I'm excited to talk about anything that you all would like to talk about.
Great, thank you. I have some questions just kind of related to the village and to yourself. So how did you come about becoming the mayor of Westbury? What was the sort of the motivating factor to take on the responsibility?
You know, my wife asks me that all the time. Actually, you know, look, as was said, I grew up in the community. I've lived there my whole life. And if you asked me when I was, you know, 12 years old, did I think I was ever going to be the mayor of the village? I would never have said I was going to be. But I was always interested in government, always interested in politics to a certain degree. And when I came out of law school, literally a month after that, I was asked if I wanted to join the planning board in the village. They were looking for, you know, a lawyer to join the planning board. I was interested, and so I did that. And you know what happens is it kind of you gradually evolve into that. I always say you really can't be mayor unless you've been a trustee, because you know you need to get your feet wet. And I think the 12 years I spent on the planning board was very instrumental in just learning about zoning and whatnot. So it kind of just evolved. I always, you know, I was brought up with the notion that you want to give back to the community and serve the community in some capacity. And so I knew I would be doing that. I never just thought I'd be mayor, but it just evolved into that. And I think by the time I became mayor, you know, I think I had the right training and the preparation for that. And by that point, I had some fairly strong ideas as to the things I thought needed to be done to take the community into the future.
So you must still see a lot of work to be done because you've just run for re-election and have been elected. So what do you think has been left undone so far that you want to focus on?
That we have a lot of these projects that still are not completed. A couple of them have been, and some of them are in various stages of completion. We also have the third track project, which is affecting our community, which is not going to be completed for several years. And some people ask me, well, you've been mayor for 12 years. Why do you want to do it for more? I still think, I have something to offer, but, I also have a phrase that I use that some people maybe think comes across as arrogant, but I have a proprietary nature about me where I grew up in the community. It's important to me. And what I say is I really don't trust the other guy, however you define that, to do it. I think that I know what I would like to see for the community going forward. Not that I know better than anybody else, but, I just think that there are things that need to be done to make sure that the community is as attractive a place or even a more attractive a place as it is today. I tell people, all the time, it's never, because, you have the NIMBY mentality that still kind of prevails in some places. And I say it's never going to be 1950 again. I grew up here. I remember how it was in the 60s and the 70s. I would love it to be that idyllic, slower pace. It's never going to be 1950 again. And so I think you need somebody, in office that is conscious of and sensitive to the history of the place, but also is able to transition, in a way that's acceptable to, a different, but essentially the same place. And I think that takes some nuance, and I think that takes some historical background to be able to navigate that. So I feel that I want to see these projects through, and I want to make sure that the community is better off, when I leave than when I came in.
So you're self-described as pro-business, which of course I'm sure everybody in our organization thinks is a good thing. Was there an initial factor that made you recognize the need to focus on economic development and economic activity in the village? Was there something like maybe some of the Post Avenue stores not being successful?
So when I was in high school, I worked in a delicatessen on Post Avenue. I worked in the deli for 9 years, and I paid my way through high school, through college, my first year of law school. But I saw during the 70s and even in the 80s, Post Avenue went through a period of time where at one point we had a big sewer project that kind of came in and kind of shut down Post Avenue, put the merchants at a real disadvantage. And then we had, various recessions and other economic things that impacted the downtown. And we also, being where we're situated, we have Old Country Road on one side, Jericho Turnpike on the other side, Roosevelt Field, within a mile or two of our border. And so there's always been a constant pressure on our main street, our downtown, by different forces, different economic forces. And I saw that firsthand just by, working in a local store, while I was coming up. And, as I got involved in government, I've met people like Eric Alexander at Vision Long Island, and we've had conversations. And, I feel there's a sense of responsibility to make sure that your downtown is vibrant and healthy. I say if you drive through a downtown that's dead, that's a community that's dead or dying. If you drive through a downtown where it's vibrant and active, then I think you're in a community it's growing and conscious of what it needs to do to stay competitive. We don't like in government, we don't like to talk about that, but frankly, our community is competing with other communities for businesses, for patrons, for residents that want to come and live in your community. And you don't usually cast it in those terms, but you're competing like you do in business, to see that you're creating an attractive place to let people do business and let people live and let people recreate and dine and do things. So I think you have to look at it with that very broad, practical view. And I think my experience growing up and seeing the distress that small business people go through, is something that local government has to be conscious of and has to address.
So I guess the next question really is what is your vision for the village, and I guess going into the future, what would it look like to you? What would be the success for the village at that point?
The projects that are ongoing, will kind of spell that to a certain extent. I have always said that I want Westbury to be one of the premier places on Long Island and Nassau County for people to want to set up shop if they want to be in business, or to live, or to retire to, or recreate or dine. And the things we've done, like the permission to build the space, the theater, it's really a unique venue in downtown Nassau. There's very few theaters, performing arts theaters of that nature. And that was a part of the puzzle. Another part of the puzzle is the streetscape improvements that we're making. Another part of the puzzle is the development, hopefully, of more housing stock. Long Island is starved for rental housing at every price point, not just the luxury stuff and not just the affordable stuff, but there are people who have lived in our community. What we've seen is a lot of the people who buy the condos and rent the apartments that are available are people who lived in the community, want to stay in the community, and it's a way for them to stay without having to keep a house or maintain a house. It's also a way for younger people to come in and get either their first apartment or their first condo and have a 30-something minute ride into the city. So we want to make our village one of the most attractive places to be, whether you live here or you work here or you want to recreate or dine. And, that's a multifaceted approach you have to take. It's not just building buildings and building apartments, but it's trying to create a sense of place. It's trying to create cultural opportunities. I just mentioned we have the Arts Council, which I formed, I guess, 7 or 8 years ago now. And one of the DRI projects was to spend $2 million to buy and renovate a building for them to have art gallery space and meeting space. That's an important part of building a sense of place. We also took a donation from the local veterans group that was really dying out, and they donated their VFW post to us, and we created a little local museum out of that, so that we can preserve the memories and honor the service of our local service people. And so it takes many dimensions. It's housing, it's strong downtown, it's cultural identity and cultural preservation of your history, but also looking forward to the future. So our goal is to do that, is to be a place where people want to be in the future, and that's sort of what everything that we're doing is oriented towards.
Great. So can you tell us if you were inspired or influenced by other communities or other regions in terms of sort of the master plan and how other areas might have transformed themselves like Westbury is currently?
I think our zoning that we put into place is kind of next level. I think it's the most innovative, and I think the most generous, if you can buy up to the most generous densities as of right on Long Island. But yes, there was certainly some precedents, and are still ongoing precedents that we kind of saw and wanted to model ourselves after. Certainly you have Patchogue and Farmingdale that have done tremendous jobs in turning communities around, over a relatively short period of time. You have places like Rockville Center, which is vibrant, Great Neck, which is vibrant with restaurants and other entertainment type of activities. You have Mineola, which is sort of a city center in and of itself. It's a little bit different from a lot of the other downtowns, different from ours, but they did a lot of really good things around their train station, which we try to emulate, not on the same scale as they've done there. We're not looking to build 8 or 9 story buildings near our train station, but certainly 5 and 6 story buildings are things that are more acceptable to our community. So we definitely looked at the examples that had been set in other places, and also just traveling around. My son went to school in the DC area, seeing what they did in Alexandria, Virginia, and some of the other business activities that I have, where we are in developing multifamily properties in other parts of the country, and seeing the types of amenities that are offered in those places, as opposed to some of the more traditional rental assets you have here and the kinds of amenities. So trying to bring all that together and kind of taking it and encoding it in our code as sort of a next level thing, but definitely had a lot of examples of great leadership in those other communities to do what they did there.
So another question I would have is that my understanding is that the rezoning is just sort of the master planning for what can be developed, giving the developers the blueprint, if you will, of what's as of right. Are there any projects or applications that you can speak of now that maybe some of our members aren't aware of that are sort of in the pipeline now?
Yeah, so we have, I would say, 5 or 6 projects that have been in discussion and are in the pipeline at some various stages, you know, some of which I'm not going to mention because they're not really public, but, you know, there are 2 that are public, and one is an RFP that the railroad has put out, the MTA has put out on a piece of property that they own adjacent to the train station, and to do a multifamily and a mixed use TOD type development on that site. And, you know, they've gone through their RFP process. My understanding is they're negotiating with 1 or 2 finalists to see if they can pick a developer, and then they would come to the village with their proposal. We have our first proposal that actually has been submitted under our TOD zoning. That's by the Bartone Terwilliger Group, and that's on a piece of property that's on the south of the railroad station, but again, just adjacent to the tracks. So it's really within 500 or 600 or 700 feet walk of the station itself. And that process, they've been filed. We'll be reviewing that and hopefully getting it, you know, through the system, you know, sometime during the course of this year. So, you know, we have a lot of activity, a lot of interest. There are a lot of the players that you've seen in other communities who are looking at properties and aggregating. And, you know, we think that the 2 that we know of, or that we know are actually concrete, either in that fact that they've been submitted or they're soon to be submitted, but we know they'll be followed pretty shortly by a couple of others.
Oh, that's good to hear. So just sort of leading into these projects and the zoning change, that the EDAC committee's past efforts have supported the zoning changes that were approved in Westbury. One of our past presidents, Doug Armstrong, who's a Westbury resident, spoke at a public hearing on CIBS' behalf in support of the zoning change. How important is it for our elected officials to hear positive opinions, and do they carry the same weight as vocal opposition in the community?
You know, I think it's vital that when there's a process like this going on, that pro development voices be heard. There are many projects that have been stymied, and we're all familiar with some of them over the years in various communities, because the opposition was overwhelming and there was really no counterbalance to that. I think that tide is changing a little bit. I think that you're seeing more acceptance of some of these types of concepts and projects as the demographics change, and as you have maybe younger people who are looking to stay and trying to figure out how they can stay. And I think you have policymakers responding to some of that, but it's absolutely vital. I think it was David Panetta reached out to me before our public hearing to see if, you know, they could send somebody, or you could send somebody. And I know that Doug came. Doug is also a member at St. Bridges, so I knew Doug. I know Doug. So I was happy that he came, and I was happy for all of the positive, you know, comments that were made. But it is important for organizations like yours, and you have the right to express, you know, just like the opposition has the right to express what they want. You know, you characterized me before as pro-business. I certainly am more pro-business oriented, but you know, I think it's important. I also recognize every community is different, and every community has an appetite that's different for these types of things. And every community has different assets and liabilities that play into whether some of these things can be done or should be done, or on what scale they should be done. So I am very conscious, you know, that sometimes the opposition is right, you know, and I think even my experience with the Third Track project, I was the first and only mayor for a long time that came out to support the Third Track project. Ultimately, all the mainline mayors came on and supported it. But at the wrap-up meeting on that, I basically said that the opposition in that project was very important because it brought about a lot of mitigation that was necessary, and it brought about a lot of public benefits to these different communities that was necessary. So opposition in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it's very important if there's a board that's trying to accomplish something important for their community, that they have voices in the community that are supporting that, because it gives them, backup in what they're trying to do.
Thank you. So now I'm going to take a question that Dave Panetta posed. With such a socially diverse community, how did you get the residents to get on board and support this big change and development? So we're talking about the NIMBYism earlier. Yeah. And I'm sure there was a lot of groundwork that was required. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how you address those stakeholders.
So generally speaking, in our community, we're fortunate. We've had a lot less opposition to these types of things over the last couple of decades as we've proceeded with this. I think we've been able to create a consensus, and a sort of a trust level between the community and the board that they know we're not going to do anything completely stupid, and we have sort of a good balancing approach to it. But specifically as it relates to the zoning that we put into place, that we went through probably about a year or so process where, well, let me back up one second. When we were granted the DRI grant, the state required us to go through a process to identify projects that the community wanted and that were going to be moved forward or proposed. And we probably came up with 40 or 50 project ideas, and ultimately 7 were funded. But that process that the state required us to go through for the DRI was required 4 or 5 public sessions where we had input from the public as to what projects they wanted to pursue. And then we narrowed that down. We had a committee that narrowed that down and submitted a report. Obviously, when we went to the actual passage of our zoning, you have to go through the secret process. And the secret process, again, affords the public an opportunity to be heard and comment on what's being proposed. So we probably had several hundred residents and stakeholders who commented in various aspects at various times on what we were doing in terms of the rezoning. And so by the time we got to the public hearing, Eric Alexander from Vision said he's never been to a public hearing on a proposal of the nature of ours and the scale of ours that had virtually no opposition expressed at the hearing. So that was a product of, I think, both our past history and consensus building, but also specifically all of the public engagement that we had with respect to the project. So that's probably an outlier. A lot of projects of that nature are going to have more opposition than we did, but I think there are reasons we didn't. But I think whenever you're proposing something of that nature, the boards that do a better job of public engagement and right sizing, are going to have less of a problem than those that are not as conscious about those things. And so I would urge anybody who's involved in those types of processes to be very conscious about that, because your project can be dead on arrival before it really gets off the ground, and you have to really avoid that.
Yeah, you were mentioning Bartone and Terwilliger. They were hoping to develop some multifamily in Lynbrook, and that got shot down almost immediately due to the community opposition. But they did eventually become successful with purchasing some blighted Capri motel that I think everybody wanted to see gone.
Yeah.
And so they didn't give up, which was nice to see. So I have a micro level question from Gary Shacker, which is, can you talk about how the local Chamber of Commerce benefits the community?
We have, in our community, we have both a Chamber of Commerce and we have a business improvement district. There's a little bit of overlap there. I think that communities that have one or both of those organizations do have a benefit, and but it does depend on how active those organizations are. And I think just as a very tangible example of how a chamber or a bid can impact the community is, during this period of COVID, a lot of the chambers really were active in terms of not only informing their businesses as to the resources that might be available to them, but also organizing publicity and other things to promote those businesses for pickup and delivery and other types of services, allowing them to kind of think outside the box. allowing residents maybe to think outside the box as to how they can continue to utilize the services of local businesses, restaurants, even, even during the pandemic. So I think the chambers and the bids really are important just in terms of promoting a theme and a message about your downtown. Those that have very effective chambers or bids, some may hold street fairs every year, some may do concert series or other things to draw people into the downtown. There are a lot of ways that those organizations can be a real benefit. And the communities that don't have a really active chamber or bid really have it's a negative, because then there's nobody really there. Governments are really not good at promoting themselves for the most part. Some politicians are, but village governments and local governments, that's not really what we do, and not really what we're really supposed to be spending tax dollars on. So when you have a bid or a chamber that can really supplement what you're doing, that's really, really crucial. And I mean, we're fortunate, as I said, we have both a bid and a chamber. They work together usually to kind of, when they can. They do their own things too sometimes, but when they can work together, it's very effective. So I think they're important.
Now I have a macro question from Peter Curry, which says, have the new multifamily rental facilities received economic assistance from the Nassau IDA?
So so there's not been an approval under our TOD zone yet of any specific project. But we have had some of the prior projects that have been done in the village, like the space, which is not it's not a TOD, or it's not a multifamily project, but the space. I know, I think Peter's familiar with this. Actually, we had an assisted living facility that was built by Jan Berman and his group. They did get a pilot. But as it relates to the TOD going forward, we've met with, we've made it plain to all the developers who we've talked to, who've come and asked the question, is we understand that you need pilot assistance. Our criteria, though, for that is going to be that the pilot has to start at the tax dollars that are being collected by the various municipalities, mostly the school district, and not at zero. Our school district in Westbury, a little bit different from other communities, is a distressed school district. It's seen an enrollment increase over the last 10, 15 years, where most school districts have seen enrollment decrease. So it's important for us that they not take a hit in terms of the tax dollars they receive. So we are going to work with the IDA and the developers to do pilots that make sense for the community. We haven't seen that as a detriment, and none of the developers seem to see that as a detriment. Our SECRA studies basically assumed that each project would have a pilot along the parameters that I just described. And so I think, again, being practical, you want these projects to be built. There has to be some assistance on that level. It's a very expensive place to build, a very expensive place to do business here in Nassau County and Long Island in general. And so, some people may be aware, when the Amazon project fell through in Queens, I wrote an op-ed in the Long Island Business News, where I basically called that failure, probably one of the biggest examples of political negligence and governmental negligence. To not understand, really, that was based on a couple of things. First was philosophical and political, but there was also, I think, a basic misunderstanding of how the financial assistance would have worked in that instance, and ignored completely the huge economic benefit that type of a project would have brought, and really misconstrued how the pilot would have worked and whatnot. So I think that we're very conscious of that these projects, if they're going to be built, are going to have that kind of assistance. And we have already signaled that we'll work with not only the IDA, but also the developers to do what's in the best interest of all of us.
So I think it's a good opportunity to open it up to some additional questions from the board. So I'll wait a couple of seconds here to see if any more questions pop up.
Hi, Mayor. I have a question. You talked about the generous densities, and a lot of times it seems when you put smaller lots, people that own a quarter acre, a half acre. In order to make these projects viable, I would think to the village and to the developer, you have to assemble, many different lots, especially in our downtowns. So can you just talk about maybe some of the challenges that come along with that? If you're kind of now somebody's lot that might have been worth X is now worth 5 or 6 times what it was because of the development. What are the challenges that come along with that? What are the delays that can occur? And how do you kind of combat that and get everybody on the same page? Or is that even something you get involved with?
Yeah, so my approach to that is I kind of let the market govern that. We don't try to micromanage that. Some municipalities would maybe utilize the power of condemnation to kind of assist in the aggregation. We can't use DRI funds to do that. And my philosophical approach would be, I would not, unless it was a completely crucial to a public purpose, I would really not use condemnation to help that. I think the market is best suited to kind of regulate those things. Clearly, when you either signal or adopt, an upzone, the property owners know that their properties are more valuable, and therefore, usually what happens is a period of time where there's an unreasonable expectation as to what their property is worth. And it takes some time for the market to kind of realize that, yes, there was an increase in value, but it wasn't a 10-time increase in value. Maybe it was a 3 or 4-time increase in value. And so we've seen some of the developers have had issues in terms of aggregating certain parcels, or they're able to aggregate, most of what they want. They got one piece in the middle that is the holdout, thinking that they're going to now, hold out for a lot more. And sometimes you have to overpay for some parcels. But I think that in the long run, the market is able to regulate that properly, where there is a balance that can be had. And there is a realization that develops that the property has an intrinsic value. And maybe sometimes it has a value above what its intrinsic value is, just because of where it's located or the special role it might play in a particular development. But even though the developers struggle with that, we kind of leave that with them. And, I think our zoning is generous. I think if you compare our zoning to anywhere else on Long Island or Nassau in particular, you have more flexibility, because you could probably pay a little bit more, because you're going to realize a higher density and a higher yield if you can put together the right property and the right package. So that was really the intent. And our zoning is designed to have the highest densities right immediately near the train station, and kind of tapering off as you get further from the train station. So that also has an effect on the value, because the guy that's 3 blocks away, he knows the density, the maximum density is only 40 units, so an acre, not 100 units an acre, or whatever, whatever that is. So I found that it's an interesting dynamic, but the developers kind of know how to navigate that. Sometimes it's problematic, but I think the market eventually settles and allows those aggregations to take place.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question from Peter Curry. Is any part of the TOD zone in the BID, in the Business Improvement District?
Yes. So if you looked at a map of the TOD and a map of the BID, there would be an overlap on the portion of Post Avenue, which is between the Railroad Avenue, which is basically the train tracks, and Maple Avenue, which is the next over East-West Road, and then Maple Avenue from Post Avenue to Union. So the bid area encompasses Maple Avenue and Post Avenue, and parts of both of those streets are in the TOD, and it's generally would be the areas that are east of Post Avenue on those two roads.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is a good time to conclude our program, and I want to thank you, Mayor, for taking the time out of your day. I think it was very informative, and we'd also like to thank you for your public service. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Thank you, Mayor. We really appreciate your time today. Love what you're doing in Westbury.
Thank you.
And we really look forward to what it's going to look like in the next next decade. So
Me
we're
too.
excited. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
And I just want to say thank you to Mike Rosenfeld and the EDAC committee and our entire board for putting this together. So appreciate your time, everybody.
Thank you.